All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll let whoever shows up a little bit late trickle in. But before we officially get started today, before I share my screen and we go over what we're doing today and the demo and all of that stuff, I do want to make a quick announcement. I mentioned it briefly in the chat a little bit ago, and that is that this week the check-in sessions are not required. So they're optional because of the holiday on Monday. That would only leave today as the check-in, which isn't really fair to force everybody to come to one day. So they'll resume like normal next week, but because of the holiday this week, they're optional. I will, of course, be here. So if you have questions and want to check in, you're more than welcome to, but otherwise it's optional and there's no need to stick around afterward if you don't want to. So all that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. And once we have the screen shared, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. Let me get organized. So I'm going to move my Zoom windows around here a little bit so that I can get prepared, just in case you guys have questions in chat. There we go. So I've pulled up exercise 205, and this is what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be building a little component of a bridge. And as we progress, I'm going to be making these kind of objects a little bit more difficult, and you'll get practice creating objects. I do these on purpose. They're carefully considered so that I'm teaching you certain specific tools. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world to just, hey, model this, and this is how we're going to do it. But we have to get a certain base level of skill before we start getting creative. So over the next several lectures, it'll be scripted. Though you'll start getting more and more autonomy for how you create something as we go forward. So today it's very just follow along. So like I said before, don't try to do it while I'm doing it. Go ahead and watch me create the object, and then when it's your turn, you can come back and watch the YouTube lectures and pause and keep going, etc. So let me do it live without trying to keep up. Okay, so that being said, the other thing I'll mention is I was a little bit behind over the weekend. I had some computer problems, and so now those problems have been fixed. And so the lecture should be posted much more quickly after our lectures happen live. But on the homepage of Canvas, you'll see at the bottom, I have lecture recordings. Those are all listed right here, and you'll be able to watch the lecture after the fact. So give me a little bit of time to process it and upload it to YouTube. It should be up by later this afternoon. Okay, so let me go back to our exercise for today, and I'm doing this so that we can have it as a reference. I'll leave it there, and now I'm going to go ahead and jump back over into my remote desktop. Some of you probably noticed that the remote desktop stopped working yesterday because the power went off at DVC. And so when the power went off, remember, by this remote desktop system, we're actually connecting to the computer labs at DVC, and that then, when the power goes off, the computer labs go offline, and we can't do our thing anymore. So just something to be aware of, that does happen occasionally. I apologize if it was an inconvenience to any of you. It is, however, back up. I've gone ahead and I've already logged into my OneDrive on the remote desktop, so I can go ahead and double click on Rhino and open up Rhino. And we'll give this a second to get started. There we go. I can say okay to these usage statistics. We'll let everything load up here. I'm going to close all of the V-Ray toolbars except that top one. You'll get used to this over and over again. And we'll dock that up at the top. And I'll go ahead and maximize the screen. And then I'm going to create a brand new file. So I'll go to File and then New. And I want to make sure that I'm using the large object inches template right here. Large object inches. I'll go ahead and say open. There we go. And so now I have a brand new fresh file to start working in. So I'm going to start working in the top view today. And so I'll double click. And what I'm drawing is essentially let me pull this back up here, is this object here. So we're going to start right there at that corner where the red arrow is pointing. And we're going to draw up, over, down, straight down here, this little piece on the bottom, and then our way back around like that. So let's talk through how we would go about doing that. Let me jump back to my Rhino here. And we're going to start with the Polyline tool. So I'll pick the Polyline tool. And I'm going to start by typing in the 0, 0 coordinate. So I'm going to build it right at the origin. And I'll actually type in 0, 0, followed by the Enter key or if you're on a Mac, it's the return key. And then I can start my drawing. So let's go ahead and turn on ortho so that we know we're drawing in a straight line. So I've clicked this little button for ortho. And now I'm going to type in my first distance. My first distance is 36 inches. Now my default units are in inches, so I don't have to put the quotation mark, but sometimes I do anyway. And when I do that, I'll hit enter. And then it's going to ask me what direction. So I want to be going straight up, so I'll make a click with the mouse going straight up. And that's my first line segment. My next line segment is going to be going over by 4 inches. So I'll type in 4 inches, and then I'll click in the direction that I want it to move. So thus far today, we've done the length plus, or the direction and the length. But this next piece, we're actually going down 36, but we're also going over another 2 inches. So this is a perfect opportunity to switch back into those relative coordinates that we used in the second lecture, in lecture 202. So to do that, I'll go ahead and type in at, we're going -2 in the x direction, comma, -36 in the y direction. And you can see that when I do that, I get that diagonal line. I'll press enter on the keyboard and that sloping line. So alternatively, right, I could have, started, let me turn on my end snap. I could have given myself a guide. I could have drawn over by 2 inches and then down by 36 inches. And then come back here and drawn the line from here to there. But if I understand what these coordinate systems do, there's no reason that I can't use that as I'm drawing. So I'll go ahead and do at -2 in the x, comma, -36 in the y. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and start right where I left off. And we're going to go down by 6 inches. This is just straight. There it is. And then here's another opportunity for us. So let's go back and look here at our drawing, right? We're going over 30 inches and we're going down by 6 inches. So we'll come back to Rhino. And we're going to say at, remember we're going over 30, comma, -6. And there's our diagonal line right there. I'll go ahead and press enter on the keyboard. And that gives us that line. I'm going to go back up. So I'll say at, this would be 30 again, comma, +6, because we're going up, and then enter. And then we'll draw up by 6 inches. And then another at, here we go, at, this is -2, comma, 36. Oops, not 367, how about 36? There we go. Enter. We'll go over by 4 inches. Click. We're going to go down by 36, or I can snap, because it should be in line here. And we'll come across, and we're going to end right there. So when I'm done, I'll have an object, and I need to join these together because of how I stopped. I'll hold down Shift, and then I'll go ahead and go to Edit, and then Join, or type in Join. And I end up with this shape, which is exactly the shape that is in our little handout here. If you're having trouble seeing this, I think you can right-click and say, let me save it to downloads, and then I'll be able to open this up. Hopefully a little bit bigger here. Ooh, that's terrible quality. All right, well, I'm going to have to work on that so you can see this a little bit better. But yes, so that's 48 inches on the inside. We have 36 inches tall. There's 6, and there's another 6, and there's 30. Let me jump back to our remote desktop right there. So I've drawn this first flat. So if I double click on the top viewport here, we could see in the perspective viewport, let me double click on the perspective viewport, we could see that I have this shape that's drawn flat on the ground. The next piece of this puzzle is going to be to rotate it so that it's standing upright. So that's where the rotate 3D comes in. So I'll go up to transform, and I'm going to choose rotate 3D. Alternately, I could type in rotate 3D in the command line, and I'll pick this line right here as my rotation axis. So I'll start here. We'll come over to that point there. My reference is just going to be going up the y-axis right now. And we'll fold that up 90 degrees until it's standing up. Right like that. The next piece is to actually create another one of these curves. So we're going to go ahead and use the offset tool to do this. So I could go up to curve, offset, offset curve. Alternatively, I could type in offset. Now notice, if I set my distance to 48, it wants to offset in line with my object, but I want it to offset going back. So if I look in here at my options, we have a distance of 48. If we keep coming through here, we'll get to the place where it says in C-plane. Right now it says no. If I click on that, it's now going to offset in this direction. So once again, in C-plane was no, it's going to do it this way. And if I choose in C-plane, yes, it's going to do it that way. That's what I wanted to create. This is my second object. So I'm going to make a copy of these just so I can show you something. So let me just make a copy here. Now, sometimes I'm going to explode these so that they're individual line segments. We could loft these individual line segments together. So I could take these opposing lines. Let me hold down Shift. So I have both of those selected. And I could go up to Surface and then Loft. And it's going to create a surface for me. We're not seeing it as a solid surface because we're still in wireframe mode. So let me switch out of wireframe mode. I'll click this little triangle down and choose shaded mode. Now I could see the surface. And then I can continue to pick opposite curves. So there and there. And we can loft. I typed in loft that time. I can pick the next set of opposite curves there and there. And we'll go to surface and then loft. Now, it should be pointed out that if I have individual line segments, if I were to take, for example, those two and these two and try to loft them all together, and I say, okay, I might not get the right results. In fact, I didn't get any results. So when they're not joined together, I have to just select two opposing curves and then loft those two opposing curves. If I keep these joined together like they are right here, when I perform the loft, I can actually do them all at once. So I'll select them both, go to Surface, and then Loft. And notice that it says drag seam to adjust. So this is where we start from. So as long as the two opposing pieces match, we'll get good results. So if I went Enter, and I said, OK, notice that it would loft all the way around, and I'd get the results that I was after. If, however, I took these two, and I said, let's loft them, and my seams weren't at the same place, let's say they were there, when I go to loft them, watch the end result. It's completely twisted because this curve here is now lining up to that curve there. That curve there is lining up to here. So we've just created a very twisty structure. So the seam matters. So let me press Control-Z to go back. Oops. There we go. And we'll loft it again. I'll go to Surface and then Loft. And again, I want to make sure that these two match up there and there. And I'll go ahead and press Enter. And I'll say OK. And that then creates this shape. Now, as is the case with Rhino, there's always multiple ways of creating these objects. So I did it with an offset and a loft. You could, right, take this curve here and we could extrude it. I could go to Curve, Extrude Curve, if I can find it. Why am I missing? There's Extend. Oh, yeah, sorry, it's under Surface. Extrude Curve, Straight. And you see that I'm starting to create it. Now I want this to be solid. So I'm going to come over here and choose Solid Yes. And then I could say 4 feet. And that then creates the object that way as well. So we have lots of options for how we create it. The reason I didn't do it this way before is because this is going to give me a little bit finer control in terms of how these are coming together. And I'm going to do that by how the ends are created because I'm going to kind of finesse the ends. But it's important to point out that there's lots of ways of creating these shapes. So just because I do it one way doesn't mean that that has to be the way that you would do it. So I'm going to fill in the ends of this loft with my surface from 3 or 4 corner points. So I'll click on that surface from 3 or 4 corner points, and I'm going to choose 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's creating that piece. Then I'm going to repeat the process, surface from 3 or 4 corner points, and I'm going to create 1, 2, and 3, and then enter. So I'm not doing 4, I'm creating that triangle, and that's important later on. And I'll show you the difference using this one as my example. So let's keep going. 3 or 4 corner points, we'll go 1, 2, 3, and ideally we'll pick the middle. Let me turn on my midpoint here. 4. And we'll repeat the process. I can right click to repeat the process, by the way. There. Right click. Here we go. 1, 2, and 3. I'll right click to repeat the process, and we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we are. So I've basically created the end of that. Now the good news is, since I have the end here, I can hold down Shift, I can select all these pieces, and I can copy it so that it comes back here. So I can go up to Transform, Copy, and I can move this, or I can copy this back to the back side of our shape, like that, which gives me a front and a back. So at this point, we've created the shape, which is actually the easy part. And now it's time to start thinking about, how do we fine tune this? If this were, I'm envisioning this as like a concrete bridge, we would rarely form this so it had sharp edges. If this was a precast module and we were gluing them together, we would take the edge off of this so it's not sharp, thereby eliminating chipping and potential problems during shipping. So we're going to use our Chamfer Surface tool. So if I go to Surface and then choose Chamfer Surfaces, the key command is Chamfer SRF. I'm going to look here, it says select first surface, but I have distances. I don't want them at 1, I'm going to do them at a half. So I'll say 0.5, and we'll do another one at 0.5. Oops, 0.5, enter. There's my second, enter. There we go. So now my distances are set at 0.5 and 0.5. And so now if I took this surface and I chamfered it to that surface, you'll see that I'll get that little bevel right on the edge. So I can repeat this process. So I could right click to repeat the command, or I could go back up to Surface, Chamfer Surfaces. My distances stay consistent, and now I'll do it from there to there. All right, so I can right click to repeat. We'll do it from there to there. And we'll come back and we'll do it from here to here. So it did a pretty good job. Notice that there are some little artifacts. There's a little piece that's sticking out that it didn't trim. This corner still has a little piece. So it's not quite perfect. So we're going to have to do some cleanup. But we also haven't done all of the surfaces yet. So I'm going to need to chamfer this surface to that surface. And I'm going to need to chamfer this surface to that surface. So once that happens, we start to have some problems in how all of this is coming together. You'll also notice, and this is part of our job for today, is that it's hard to kind of zoom in and navigate because our orbit point is far away. So what I'm going to do to change that is I'll draw with a polyline a triangle. And the triangle is going to go from those 3 points of intersection, there, and there. So you see that little triangle right there? That's what I'm drawing. Then I'm going to type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. And when I do that, my orbit is now going to go around that object that I just selected, which really helps as we're trying to create this. So now I need to do some trimming. So I'll go up to Edit and then Trim, or I can type Trim into my command. And I need to trim off these pieces that are long so that I'm nice and clean. Let's do it over here for this corner. So we'll do the same thing. I'll use my polyline. We'll go 1, 2, 3, and close it. There's my triangle. I'll type Z, enter for zoom, S, enter for selected. Now I'm orbiting around that point. And I can then go into edit trim, or I could type trim. And we can make those pieces go away as well. Now it's still hollow, so we do need to fill that in with a surface, but we've cleaned up the corner a lot. Let's go ahead and use our surface from 3 or 4 corner points, and we'll go ahead and fill that one in. I'll hit enter to finish, and let's replace it one more time right here. 1, 2, 3, enter, and there we go. Now I have those corners solved. So we can flip around and go to the back side here. We need to do another round of chamfering. Chamfer surface there and there. Right click to repeat, chamfer surface there and there. And then once again, I'll draw these little triangles. So we'll go to there, and there's my triangle. We'll Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. Now I can orbit around that object and we can trim it. I'll go up to edit and then trim. And we'll trim off this piece and we'll trim off that piece. And we're left with just that little triangle. And at that point, we can use our surface from 3 or 4 corner points and pick 3 corner points, 1, 2, 3, followed by enter, and that fills that piece in. So this is a bit tedious, but it's also working on kind of fine detail in a Rhino model. And that's what we're after today, is this practice. So I can do it one more time with my 3 corner points, there, 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 and there. Enter. Sorry. Let me select it. Zoom, selected. Trim. And we'll get rid of the pieces that are hanging out. There we go. And then we'll do our surface from 3 or 4 corner points, and we'll fill those pieces in as well. Okay, so all of that went fairly smooth. We did those upper corners. Let's look at what's happening down below here. So we can repeat the chamfer surface. Like I said, it's chamfer SRF right here and right here, and that cleans that up rather nicely. I'm going to go ahead and ignore this edge. And we're not going to do that edge because that's ultimately what you're walking on. So we'll leave that one consistent and sharp, but we'll work our way around and do this edge and that edge. And then we need to do this edge and that edge.
Why don't you clean the...
and then you would continue your way back up here. And back up to the top there. And back up there as well. David, you've got a question. Go ahead.
Why don't you clean the black line that circle?
You're muted still.
Oh.
And oh, sorry. I saw just David. Sorry. Hila, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
How come I'm not hearing it? Wait, hold on. Maybe my audio's messed up. Hold on. Hold on. Different Zoom session, things get screwed up. Audio. Of course, it wasn't my speakers. There we go. Try it again.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep, that was my fault. Yep, I had the wrong speaker set. Go ahead.
Why don't you delete the black line that around the surface?
You can. I'm ignoring the line because when we go to render it later, that line's going to disappear. So lines never render. It's only the surfaces that render. So I have a habit of leaving the lines in case I wanted to reference them later on. But you absolutely could select it and delete it, or you could put it on a different layer. So I could put it on here. If you didn't want to delete it, I could say change object layer, and then I could turn off that line altogether. So I used it as a reference, but I don't need it anymore. So you're absolutely correct. You could delete it. So obviously I was working my way around that, but let's come back to this object. Remember, I created this object using an extrude. This one's going to present a problem potentially with how the chamfers work. So let's try it. Chamfer surface. And I'll do those two surfaces together. See how, because this is a continuous surface, when I do the chamfer, it makes this funky little extension because this edge of the surface comes all the way down here, but this surface ends at that kink. So my chamfer ends up being awkward at this corner. So if we wanted to correct that problem, we'd actually have to split apart this surface on the end. So I could draw a line like that, and then I could take this object and I could split it with that piece. We'll see if it did it. Nope, I actually have to explode it first. Explode, there we go. Then we'll take this and we'll split it with that piece. We're going to cover split in more detail, but I'd have to actually split it to create it. That's why creating it this way saves you the step of the explode and the split. So that's why I have you doing it that way. So even though there's multiple ways of getting the same result, sometimes I have you do it one way because it makes your life a little bit easier. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've worked my way around this object. We've got a slight issue right here. And so this is one of those interesting things where if you're rendering from this far away, you can't tell. Even if you're rendering from about here, you probably can't tell. If you're at really fine detail, yeah, maybe that becomes a problem. The other place that it can become a problem is when you're going to 3D print this object, because it doesn't like these kinds of little errors in a 3D print. So is it necessary to fix it? No, probably not. But since we're in the interest of trying to really fine-tune what we're making, let's look at this and see if we can't fix it. So I have a couple different methods that I could use to fix it. The first one would be to actually draw a new line that goes from that point down to here. And then I could use that new line that I just created as a trim. And I could trim off, oops, sorry, I picked the wrong thing. I could trim off that surface. That then cleans up that surface, but it doesn't solve this surface's problem. So on this surface, I either need to modify the surface or just create a new one. In all reality, creating the new one's probably faster, so I'll delete that surface. And then I can use that curve coupled with this new curve that I just created, there and there. I can use a loft to create that surface. So I'll go up to surface and then loft, and that's going to create that surface for me without that little error at the corner. Okay, so give me 1 second, hold on, and we'll keep going. All right, continuing, thank you. So that is kind of a fine level fix. So for those of you that are feeling comfortable in Rhino, if you want to experiment with creating that fix, you absolutely can work on and create that fix. The other option here would be to modify this existing surface. And that's a little bit more challenging because it's already been trimmed once. So even if I were to come over here and I were to show my control points, you see that that point there is missing a little bit. So I could move that point. Let me turn on my point snap to right here, but I'm missing that little chunk. So Rhino does have a command called Untrim. So I could use Untrim to untrim what was already created there. I just select the edge and it gets rid of it. And then I could use this surface, oops, let me finish the command. I could use this surface that I just created with a regular trim and get rid of that piece. So it's another way of fixing it, but like I said, it's a more advanced way of fixing it. So I'm not expecting you to do it at this point. It's probably easier to just go ahead and create a new surface like that. Now, the other thing that we have is I didn't chamfer this lower edge, so we could chamfer that if we wanted. So I could say this and this, which then leaves us with that triangle piece again. So we'd come in here with our triangle, there, there, and there. And then we could select it and then trim. Get rid of that surface there. Like that. I'll hit enter to finish. And then we could use our surface from 3 or 4 corner points. 1, 2, 3, and then enter to finish. And that then fills in that little corner. Again, optional, you don't really need to do it. You do not need to chamfer these two surfaces. They're fine with their joint. You really don't need to chamfer this lower point either. But this is all part of practice. So a lot of today's job is really spending your time and working your way through the finer details of how you're creating it. Now, all of that being said, there are efficiencies in how you start to model. So for our purposes, this is what you're doing today, but I like to introduce these concepts along the way just so you can see how I might go about doing it now that I'm more proficient in a program like Rhino. So let me take this curve that I created and I'll copy it again and I'll put it right over here. Now, if it were me, I probably wouldn't model the whole thing and work on all the corners. What I would do is I would take half of this shape. So let's trim that out like that. And then I would build it from here. So I'd take these pieces like that. Let's go ahead and join them. And I'm going to copy it half the distance. So it would be at 2 feet instead of 4. So I'm building a quarter of this shape. We could take these two and I'd loft them. Perfect. Let me recenter my zoom. So I'll select this object, zoom, followed by S for selected. Now I'm working on that object there. Let me go ahead, and it looks like those two didn't quite connect. That's because I'm using, so let's do a chamfer surface between this and this, between this and this. I didn't create my object in the front here yet, so let's build that. Right click to repeat. So I'm doing all the same things. I'm just doing it 1 time instead of 4 times. So let's go there. Like that. And then we'll come back to our chamfer surface. And let's do that and that, that and that. Like that. So once I have that shape then I can use my mirror tools. So I could select this whole object, I could mirror it. It's going to ask for the mirror plane. By the way, mirror was under transform and then mirror. My mirror plane would be there to create the first piece. Then I could take both pieces, mirror again, transform, mirror, and I could create the back. So when I do that, obviously this isn't finished, but I would only have to deal with a few of the corners, and then I could repeat the process. So it's just an efficiency in how you're choosing to model. It doesn't matter how you go about doing it, but I like to kind of walk you through this process and the thinking behind it. Okay, so when we're all done, we want to do a little bit of a render just to confirm that it's working. And this is also good practice. So I'm going to take all of the objects except my final piece, and we'll put those on different layers. So I'm going to hold down Shift to select multiple objects. I'm going to right click on this layer 2, and I'm going to change object layer, and then we'll turn that off. And that leaves me with just this object. Now remember, in order to do the render, we need to go back to doing our basic setup. And to do that, we'll create a V-Ray infinite plane. Oops. I just lost my mouse connection. That's really annoying. There we go. We'll create a V-Ray infinite plane. And so let's go ahead and create a layer for environment. And then I'll create a sublayer for infinite plane, IP. And I'll also create a sublayer for light. So the infinite plane is going to go on this IP layer. So let's make it the current layer. And I'll add the V-Ray infinite plane to it. And oh, please choose V-Ray as current renderer. My mistake. Let me go to render, current renderer, V-Ray for Rhino. There we go. Now I can have my infinite plane. There it is. So as we said before, the great thing about having it on its own layer is that you can lock it so you don't accidentally select it. So it's locked. Let's create the light. We'll use a box to help create our light. So this is all repetition and practice. There's our box, and we'll choose the basic directional light. It's this one right here. It says select end of light vector. We'll go the lower corner. We'll snap to the upper corner. There's my light. I can delete the box. I don't need that anymore. There's my light, and let's put it on the light layer. So I'm going to right click on light here and say change object layer. Perfect. And so now it's on its light layer. The only problem right now that I'm having is that my bridge is below the ground. So if I were to render this, well, I have more than one problem. It's a little bit too light because I haven't assigned a material yet either. So let's work through those problems. First off, I've selected this. Let's go to my V-Ray asset editor. Let's look at materials. I'm going to open the drawer to the left. I'm going to go to concrete. We'll just pick some kind of basic concrete here. How about concrete simple right here? We'll right click and say apply to selection. Now, of course, I could apply it to a layer if I wanted to. We'll just do it to the selection. And let's try that render again. Still looking too bright. So we'll come back into my V-Ray settings. I'll click on the little gear icon here. And we'll come down here into my camera. And we're going to adjust the exposure value up to about 14. There it is. Now let's try that render again. I'll click the teapot. And much better. I'm getting my little concrete there. But see how we're not getting the full base. So I need to move that up. So I'll take my whole object and I'll go to transform and then move. And from here, I'm going to choose vertical. So I'm just going up. I'm not moving up and down in the XY. That gets me above the ground plane. We'll zoom in on my object here a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and render again. Let me click on the teapot. And now my render is complete. So we can see it with a little bit of shadow. Now I know that the concrete doesn't quite look correct here. We can pick a different concrete, but we're also going to come back in 3 class days. So it won't be, not today, it'll be next Wednesday, it'll be in a week. And we'll talk about how do you make the material look good on a particular object. So right now, obviously it doesn't look good. We could try a different material. Let's go back to V-Ray and let's try this concrete simple and see what happens. Let's apply to selection. And we'll go back to the teapot and we'll render it. And that looks better. It's still not quite perfect, but it'll work for our purposes. So once this is finished rendering, I am going to save it. So I'll click the little disk icon here. Now remember, when I go to save it, it needs to go into my OneDrive folder and into today's folder. There it is. I would create a new folder for fall of 2022. There we go. And if I save it as a JPEG, it's going to preserve the background. So this is my bridge. Exercise 205. There we go. And that then saves my rendering. I do want you to make sure that you're saving the Rhino file as well. So when we get to this stage, I want to make sure that you save the Rhino file as well. So go to File and then Save. And we're going to be saving this Rhino 7 3DM file. So again, let's put it into our folder for today. If I can find it, there we go. 205. Helps if I can type here. And we'll go ahead and save it. The reason that I'm saving this file is we will come back and use it again later on in a couple lectures. Okay, so we are going to recycle this and we're going to use it again. Okay, so our job today is to create this and to spend 2 hours fine-tuning the details. So I do really want you to work your way through all of these corners, front, back, bottom, top. Really try to fine-tune it so that it looks well resolved and finished. and then go ahead and give me a rendering of it. And then you'll turn that rendering in to Canvas. Okay, so I know that I didn't end up using the whole time today. I'm a little bit short. Part of that is because I can go through it much quicker than you will. And it's practice in doing it. And that's why I'm asking you not to try to follow along step by step while I'm doing it, and instead just watch. And then when you come back, we'll have the recording and you can pause and go through. I will get this posted as soon as I can today so that you guys can actually follow it along step by step to make sure that you get the end results that you like. Okay, so like I said in the beginning, if you came in a little bit late, I want to make sure that you get this announcement as well. I'm going to stop my share here. And that is that we will not be having our mandatory check-ins this week because of the Monday holiday. I didn't think it was fair to have everybody have to come today. We also don't have too much that really needs to be talked about. So we've eliminated, or I've eliminated, the mandatory check-in for today only. Next week, we'll come back to our normal check-ins where you pick either Monday or Wednesday to come to one of your check-in sessions. That being said, if you do have questions or you want to go over something or you need some explanation or you're having difficulty with a particular command, stick around and we'll do a check-in session. You can drop in and we'll do it. Like I said, it's not mandatory, but if you're having trouble, I'll be here. Okay? So with that, I'll let you all go. If you have any questions, stick around and we'll get through them.